The philosopher A.C. Grayling says that secularism is a basic right. And I think this is an important truth. I would add, given the vile realities of Islamism, which is a religious right movement across the world, that it is also a historical task and necessity. And it's not just a necessity of a secular Europe, which we often hear about, but the necessity of a secular Middle East, a secular North Africa, a secular Asia and world. Nonetheless, this right and necessity that's obviously vehemently opposed by Islamists with their usual murder and mayhem is also vehemently opposed by the cuddly cultural relativist and postmodernist leftists, feminists, and a pathetic excuse of a pro-Islamist left. And I say this from someone who is as someone who's on the left myself. This lot implies that secularism, that equality, that free expression, the right to criticize religion, women's liberation are only for those who are white and Western. And have you noticed that even the so-called minorities, like the Muslim minority, and I put this in quotes because I hate the term minority, never equal citizens before and under the law, who've lived for generations in the West, they're still not deserving of rights and freedoms which are considered Western. The rest of us, we must live under Sharia law, even in Europe, and be grateful for the veil as a right and a choice. We are only allowed freedom and rights within the cultural and religious context and confines of Islam. Thanks, but no thanks. Try and defend secular values, and this lot are lined up as prefects with their accusations of racism, Islamophobia, and cultural imperialism. If you say that Sharia law, which is based on the Quran, the Hadith, sayings and actions of Muhammad, Islam's prophet, and Islamic jurisprudence, is misogynist and discriminatory. Just to explain more, and I think you will all know, Sharia law, its civil code, includes rules that state a woman's testimony is worth half that of a man's, women are granted limited rights to divorce, child custody is given to the father at a preset age, irrespective of the welfare of the child, girls get half the inheritance of boys, and according to a Sharia judge in Britain, there's no such thing as marital rape. Calling it rape is the offense, not the rape itself. And of course, under its criminal code, it's downright barbaric. In Iran, for example, there are 130 offenses punishable by death, including heresy, blasphemy, apostasy, and you've got people still being stoned to death in the 21st century and hung from city squares for acts incompatible with chastity. Try and tell this lot that the veil is not a piece of clothing, but a tool to restrict and suppress women, like female genital mutilation, like foot binding. It's a mobile prison, imposing sex apartheid that is as inhuman as race apartheid. But women and girls are even expected to carry the wall of segregation on their very backs. In their topsy-turvy world, opposing women's subhuman status, demanding equality and secularism, the right to criticize all religion, not just Christianity, is on par to them with joining forces with the far right. It's not. I oppose US-led militarism. That doesn't mean I support the Islamic regime of Iran. I despise both, I oppose both. And I oppose all forms of fascism, including Islamic fascism. The main problem is that this lot considers all cultures as equally valid and worthy of respect, and buy into the culturally relativist notion that societies in the Middle East and North Africa, and also the so-called Muslim community in the West, are homogeneous, Islamic, and conservative. But there is no one homogeneous culture anywhere. Because it is those in power that determine the dominant culture, this point of view often sees Islamist values and sensibilities as those of the authentic Muslim. But as Musa Bedeiri, he's a professor at the oldest Palestinian university, as he says, when he was threatened with death for posting a cartoon on his door, and Islamists in Palestine were outraged at it. He said the Islamists resort to threats and abuse of physical violence, attempting to appropriate to themselves the sole authority of what Muslims can and cannot say, can and cannot think or do. There are and will remain as many different Muslims as there are unfettered minds. And in fact, Muslims, and I put that in quotes, or those labeled as Muslims, including myself very often, and my name, Namazie, means someone who prays, include secularists, include freethinkers, ex-Muslims, women's rights campaigners, socialists, secularists. Even someone like Salman Rushdie or like Taslima Nasreen speaks on behalf of Muslims. As writer Hanif Qureshi says about Salman Rushdie, he speaks for their doubts. He speaks the bits of them that they can't actually think and feel sometimes. Do I really believe in this stuff but can't really say? Conflating Islamist with Muslim ignores the immense dissent, including amongst those who are considered Muslims, and denies the social and political struggles and class politics. It's a narrative that's peddled by the Islamists and their apologists in an attempt to feign representation, restrict dissent, and to prescribe what are the acceptable limits of free expression. Ironically, like the nativist far right, which despises multiculturalism, but benefits from its ideas of difference to scapegoat the other and to promote its own form of white identity politics, these postmodernists, leftists and feminists and liberals also use multiculturalism to side with the oppressor by demanding respect and tolerance for oppression characterized as difference, no matter how intolerable. Don't get me wrong, of course racism exists, but you cannot stop racism by limiting dissent and free expression and siding with Islamic fascism. As women living under Muslim law say, fundamentalist terror is by no means a tool of the poor against the rich, of the third world against the West, of people against capitalism. It is not a legitimate response that can be supported by the progressive forces of the world. Its main target is the internal democratic opposition to their theocratic project and to their project of controlling all aspects of society in the name of religion, including education, the legal system, youth services. When fundamentalists come to power, they silence people. They physically eliminate dissidents, writers, journalists, poets, musicians, painters, like fascists do. Like fascists, they physically eliminate the Untermensch, the subhuman amongst them, the inferior races, gays, mentally or physically disabled people, and they lock women in their place, which, as we know from experience, ends up being in a straitjacket. Clearly, women are freer the less of a role religion plays in the public space, in the state, in the judicial system. It's not the other way around. Of course, when speaking of Islam or any religion, I'm not referring to Islam as a personal belief. Everyone has the right to religion or atheism, but Islam today is not a personal matter. It's the banner of a far-right political movement. It's an inquisition. It's an industry. It's a mafia. It's a killing machine. Religion is a private matter. When it comes to religion in the state and law and educational system, then it becomes a matter of political power and control. No religion frees women, particularly not one that has access to political power. Rights within the context of Islam is unacceptable, however it is interpreted, however moderate it becomes. It will never give men and women the rights they deserve and demand in the 21st century. Iranian Marxist Mansour Hekmat says, 100 years ago, avant-garde humanity would have laughed at the proposition that human liberation could be achieved through priests, moderation of religion, and the emergence of new interpretations from within the church. Today, sadly, there are professional scholars and academics who prescribe that the Iranian woman can for now at least, take secularism to mean the addition of a lighter shade of black to the officially approved colors of the veil. Things are changing though. secularists living in the West are still far behind. It's a new period of human development after decades of Islamism, US-led militarism, unbridled free market reign, cultural relativism, and the retreat of all things universal. Today is the era of the 99% movement and the revolutions in the Middle East and North Africa, many of them female-led. And there are many who are insisting on secularism on the streets and via social media, which shouldn't really be surprising given the large young population in many countries of the region, which brings with it challenges to the status quo, as does the revolutions and the backlash against Islamism. Even if you're not looking, you can see that resistance in Turkey, in Iran, in Pakistan, in Bangladesh, in Algeria, in Egypt. Whilst it may be hard to sometimes see given the perceived gains by Islamists in the region, but they are in fact winning as a counter-revolutionary force to suppress the revolutions, and the fight is not yet over. The change of era is palpable. No one knows better than those living under Islamism that secularism is a precondition for the improvement of women's rights. All women, not just those who are white or Western. Of course, there are those who prefer Sharia law to secular law, and there are people who prefer to bring back racial apartheid, slavery, or even the death penalty. But that is irrelevant here. Sharia law and Islamic states are oppressive. There is no right to oppress. And rights are universal. They were fought for by the working class, the left, progressive social movements, not handed down by the establishment, and they belong to everyone. In the words of women's rights campaigners who chanted on the streets of Tehran in 1979 in opposition to compulsory veiling, they had acid thrown in their faces, and that movement was pushed back, though it is very alive today. Their slogans were neither Eastern nor Western, rights are universal, and freedom, not Islam, is my culture. I will add to that slogan, secularism. Secularism is our right. Thank you very much.